evening was calm,
Madam.
and the restaurant buzzed with the sound of quiet conversations, soft music, and the clinking of glasses. It was the kind of place where people came to celebrate special occasions or to enjoy the luxury of fine dining. The air smelled of roasted herbs, fresh bread, and expensive wine. Every table was carefully arranged with white linen, sparkling glasses, and candles that gave the whole place a golden glow. The guests were dressed well, but there was a relaxed, respectful atmosphere until the doors suddenly opened. In walked a woman who immediately drew attention without even trying. She was tall, wearing a dress that looked like it belonged on a fashion runway. Diamonds glimmered on her ears. Her fingers carried rings that shone under the lights, and a golden bracelet clinked softly with each step she took. She didn't just enter. She arrived as though the restaurant was a stage and she was the star everyone was waiting for. People turned their heads, some in admiration, some in silent judgment, but she didn't care. She wanted their attention, and she had it. Her heels clicked sharply against the polished floor, and the sound echoed, making the waiters and even the guests notice her presence. She carried an expensive leather bag tucked under her arm, and the faint scent of her costly perfume followed her, mixing with the aroma of food. She walked with the kind of confidence that came from money and status, her chin slightly raised, eyes scanning the room like a queen looking over her kingdom. The hostess at the front gave her a polite smile, ready to lead her to a table. But before the young hostess could say anything, the woman waved her off with a flick of her hand as if she didn't need anyone's help. "I know where I want to sit," she said in a sharp tone, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. The hostess stepped back politely, though the sting of being dismissed was clear on her face. The woman had already moved past her, heading straight for a table in the center of the restaurant where everyone could see her. She placed her bag on the chair next to her and slowly sat down, brushing the fabric of her expensive dress as if making sure no wrinkle dared to appear. Then she pulled out her phone, the latest model, shining like a little piece of treasure. She scrolled through it carelessly, not really paying attention but making sure people noticed. The other guests tried to go back to their meals, but there was something about her that kept drawing glances. Some whispered quietly, others rolled their eyes, but she seemed pleased. She thrived on being seen, admired, and perhaps even feared. A waiter walked past with a tray of drinks, and for a second, the woman frowned as though the man's presence near her was an inconvenience. She adjusted her bracelet and leaned back in her chair, her body language telling everyone that she believed she belonged to a higher world than those around her. The atmosphere of the restaurant had shifted. Before she arrived, there was warmth and comfort in the air. People were enjoying themselves. But now her energy had created a different tone, one of tension and unspoken discomfort. The staff exchanged quick looks. They had seen customers like her before, the kind who believed money gave them power over everyone. Yet despite her coldness, there was no denying she had a presence that filled the room. She was beautiful, rich, and confident, but behind her polished appearance was something harder, an attitude that said she was not there simply to eat. She was there to be seen. As she picked up the menu, she didn't even glance at the prices. She flipped through it like it was beneath her, rolling her eyes at certain dishes and smirking at others. It wasn't about food. For her, this was a performance, and the restaurant was her stage. The waiters, trained to remain calm, whispered quietly among themselves about who would approach her table. Nobody wanted to be the first. They knew she wasn't going to make it easy. One of them, a young waitress, finally gathered her courage and stepped forward, determined to greet the woman with the same respect she gave every guest. But as the waitress walked toward her, the rich woman continued to adjust her jewelry and check her reflection in the shiny surface of her phone, as though the young worker approaching was invisible. She only looked up when the footsteps grew near, and even then her gaze was not warm. It was sharp, scanning, and ready to judge. At that moment, the story of the night was about to begin. The restaurant, the guests, the staff, all of them would soon witness an exchange no one expected. What seemed like just another night in a fine restaurant would soon turn into a lesson that none of them would forget. And it all started with the grand entrance of one wealthy woman, her pride shining brighter than her diamonds. The young waitress had been working at the restaurant for almost a year. She wasn't from a wealthy family, nor did she wear fine clothes or expensive perfumes. Her uniform was plain, but she kept it neat. Her shoes were old, the soles worn thin from long shifts, but she always polished them to make them look presentable. She wasn't here to impress. She was here to earn her living with honesty. From a corner of the room, she had already noticed the woman who had just walked in. Everyone had noticed her. How could they not? She carried herself like she owned not only the restaurant, but the entire city. The waitress had seen difficult customers before, people who believed the world revolved around them. Still, she took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and picked up her notepad. It was her job to serve with kindness, no matter who sat at the table. Slowly, she walked toward the woman's table. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if her legs already knew this would not be an easy task. The woman sat with one arm resting on the back of her chair, her fingers tapping against the table as though she was impatient even before being spoken to. The glow of the candle on the table caught the sparkle of her diamonds, and her eyes were fixed not on the waitress but on the people around, as if checking whether they were watching her performance. The waitress arrived at the table and gave her best polite smile. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome. May I help you with your order?" Her voice was gentle, professional, the kind of voice trained to sound warm even when her heart was racing. The woman's eyes finally shifted toward her, and in that glance there was no warmth at all. Instead of replying right away, she allowed her gaze to travel from the waitress's head down to her shoes. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of the scuffed leather, and a faint smirk appeared on her lips. "What's your name?" she asked, her tone sharp. The waitress answered softly, "My name is Sarah." "Sarah," the woman repeated slowly as though tasting the name, not to appreciate it but to find fault in it. "Of course. Plain name. Plain uniform. Plain everything." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was just enough for the nearby tables to hear. Heads turned slightly, some pretending not to listen, but their ears stayed alert. Sarah's smile wavered for a split second, but she kept her composure. "Would you like something to drink while you look at the menu?" she asked kindly. The woman chuckled, a low laugh filled with sarcasm. "Do you even know how to pronounce half of these drinks? Or do you just stand here pretending until someone tells you what they want?" The comment stung, but Sarah refused to let it show. She had been taught patience not only in her job but in life itself. She nodded respectfully. "I assure you, ma'am, I can guide you through the options if you need any help." But the woman wasn't looking for help. She was looking for a target. Her eyes sparkled not with kindness but with amusement at her own cruelty. She leaned closer, her voice dripping with arrogance. "People like you should be grateful you even get to work in a place like this. Scrubbing tables, carrying plates, that must be the highlight of your life, isn't it?" Sarah's cheeks burned, though she held her smile. The restaurant felt suddenly colder, as if the warmth from the candles had disappeared. Around the room, some diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A couple at a nearby table exchanged a quiet glance, their expressions showing pity for the waitress and disapproval for the woman's words. But the wealthy woman didn't care. She thrived on this moment, enjoying the discomfort she caused. She tapped her bracelet against the table, each click like a small announcement of her power. Sarah steadied her voice. "Would you like me to bring you water while you decide?" The woman waved her hand dramatically, as though brushing away an annoying insect. "Fine, bring me water, but make sure it's the best one. Not the cheap kind you give to people like yourself." Sarah nodded again, quietly stepping back, her shoes making no sound against the floor. As she walked away, her heart felt heavy. She wasn't embarrassed for herself. She was used to hard days, long shifts, and the occasional rude customer. But what pierced her was the idea that someone could feel so much pride in tearing another person down. Behind her, the woman sat proudly, unaware that the story of the night was shifting with every cruel word she spoke. She believed she had won a small victory, but life had a way of turning arrogance into humiliation. And in that restaurant, surrounded by strangers, the stage was already being set for a truth that would leave her frozen in her seat. The glass of water was placed gently on the table, but the woman barely looked at it. Sarah stood silently for a moment, giving the rich woman space to decide her order. Yet instead of speaking to her politely, the woman tilted her head and smirked. She was not looking at the menu at all. She was looking at Sarah, studying her as though she was some object meant for ridicule. "You know," the woman began in a loud voice. Her words meant not only for Sarah, but for the tables around them. "I sometimes wonder why restaurants hire people who look so ordinary. Shouldn't a place like this have staff who match the elegance of the room? Her words sliced through the quiet hum of the restaurant. Conversation slowed. Forks hovered in the air. People were listening, even if they pretended not to. Sarah, her hands tightly gripping her notepad, felt her chest tighten. She had been insulted before, but there was something different about this moment. The woman wasn't just being rude. She was making a performance out of her cruelty. The woman leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Tell me, Sarah," she said, dragging out the name with mockery. "Do they pay you enough here to buy yourself better shoes? Or are those secondhand? They look like they've survived a war." A quiet laugh escaped her lips, sharp and cold. A couple of guests glanced down at Sarah's shoes. They were clean but clearly old. The leather softened and wrinkled with age. Sarah felt her ears burn, but she held her smile as best she could. "I do my best to keep them neat, ma'am," she replied softly, her voice steady even though her hands trembled slightly. "Oh, how noble," the woman mocked, placing a hand dramatically on her chest as if pretending to be touched. Then, without missing a beat, she raised her voice further. "But honestly, what kind of restaurant lets people like you serve their guests? It's embarrassing." The words fell like stones into the silence. A waiter carrying plates stopped mid-step. The couple at the next table exchanged a disapproving look. An older man near the corner frowned deeply, shaking his head, but the rich woman thrived on the attention. Her eyes glittered with satisfaction. She wanted everyone to see her superiority, to hear her voice dominate the room. Sarah swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain calm. "Would you like me to recommend something from the menu?" she asked, her voice still respectful, though each word was heavy. The woman laughed, her sound sharp and cutting. "Recommend you?" She leaned back in her chair, her bracelet jingling as she gestured at the menu. "Please, darling, I doubt you've ever even tasted half of what's written here. Do you even know what foie gras is? Or do you call it fancy meat where you come from?" A ripple of uncomfortable laughter ran through a small group at another table. They weren't laughing because it was funny. They were laughing because they didn't know how else to react. The humiliation in the air was thick, spreading across the room like smoke. Sarah's throat tightened, but she stayed rooted, her notepad still open. She nodded politely. "I'm familiar with it, ma'am. Would you like me to bring you some recommendations from our chef?" The woman rolled her eyes. "No, thank you. I don't take advice from someone who probably eats instant noodles at home." Her tone dripped with disdain. Then she leaned closer, her words quieter but sharper like a knife pressed against the skin. "Do yourself a favor, dear. Find another job, something that suits your level." Sarah's chest rose and fell quickly, her breath unsteady. She wanted to cry, but she didn't. She wanted to disappear, but she couldn't. This was her job, her responsibility, and she wasn't going to give this woman the satisfaction of breaking her. The silence around the room was broken by the clinking of silverware as someone deliberately set down their fork, making it clear they disapproved. But the woman ignored it, lifting her glass of water and sipping as though she had won a grand victory. Sarah turned to leave, her steps heavy, when the woman called after her again. "Oh, and Sarah?" she said, smiling wickedly. "Do try not to spill anything when you come back. I'd hate for you to embarrass yourself further." The words struck like thunder. Sarah nodded quietly and walked away, her heart aching but her dignity intact. She did not reply because she knew there was no point. Some people did not want conversation. They only wanted control. Yet what the woman did not know was that her cruel performance was being watched closely. Every word she used to humiliate the waitress was building a story that was about to twist against her. The eyes of the room were no longer filled with admiration for her jewels and dress. They were filled with judgment. And though she still sat proudly in her chair, believing she had established her power, the truth waiting just beyond the moment would soon turn her arrogance into silence. For humiliation is a dangerous game. Sometimes the one who delivers it is the one who ends up tasting it the most. The restaurant had grown strangely quiet. Conversations that once flowed with laughter and comfort were now scattered, interrupted by the sharp remarks of the rich woman. Every time she opened her mouth, the air grew heavier, and yet she seemed completely unaware, or perhaps unwilling to care about the discomfort she caused. Sarah walked toward the counter, her notepad still in hand. Though she hadn't been able to write down anything, her chest felt tight, her steps slow, but her training kept her from breaking. She whispered quickly to another waiter, "Could you please call the manager?" Her voice was calm, but her eyes revealed the storm building inside her. The waiter nodded, and within moments a man in his late 40s appeared from the back office. He was tall, with neatly combed hair and a suit that was sharp but not flashy. His very presence carried authority, the kind that came not from loudness but from quiet control. This was Mr. Collins, the manager, a man respected by both the staff and regular customers. As he walked into the dining area, the mood shifted slightly. Staff straightened their backs and guests looked at him with relief. They knew he was the kind of man who handled situations with dignity. The rich woman noticed him too. A smile crept across her face, a smile filled with the certainty that she was about to win again. She leaned back in her chair, adjusting her bracelet, waiting for the moment when the manager would come to her side, bow his head, and scold the waitress for daring to exist in her world. Mr. Collins walked calmly to the table. His eyes first flicked towards Sarah, then to the woman seated in front of her. He gave a professional smile, though his expression carried the seriousness of a man who already sensed what had happened. "Good evening," he said in a steady voice. "I understand there's some concern here." The woman immediately seized the opportunity. She straightened in her chair and spoke loudly, making sure the nearest tables could hear. "Finally, someone in charge. I was beginning to think this place had no standards at all. Look at who you've hired." She gestured toward Sarah with a dramatic sweep of her hand. "This girl is completely unfit for a restaurant of this level. Her shoes, her voice, her entire presence, it's embarrassing. I can't believe I've had to put up with her." Sarah lowered her eyes, her cheeks warm with shame, though she said nothing. The woman continued, her voice dripping with arrogance. "I suggest you train your staff better, or perhaps hire people who actually belong in a fine place like this. Because honestly, she makes this restaurant look cheap." Mr. Collins listened without interrupting. His calm expression didn't change, though his eyes flickered toward Sarah again, as if silently reassuring her. Then he looked back at the woman, his hands folded neatly in front of him. "Ma'am," he said with quiet authority, "I appreciate your feedback, but I must ask, was there an issue with the service itself?" The woman laughed as though the question was beneath her. "Issue? Everything is an issue. The way she walks, the way she talks. She's not the kind of person who should be standing in front of me." Around the room, a few diners shifted in their chairs, clearly uncomfortable. Some whispered softly to one another, shaking their heads. The atmosphere had changed again. This was no longer simply about rudeness. It was about cruelty laid bare in public. Mr. Collins gave a short nod, his voice still calm but firmer now. "I see. And to confirm, did Sarah get your order wrong, speak to you disrespectfully, or fail to serve you properly in any way?" The woman blinked, caught off guard for a second. Then her lips curved into another mocking smile. "Oh, don't twist my words. She hasn't made a mistake yet. But it's only a matter of time, isn't it? People like her always do. I'm simply saving you the trouble." For the first time, a small frown appeared on Mr. Collins' face. His patience was still intact, but his tone sharpened ever so slightly. "Ma'am, all of our staff are trained to serve with respect. And from what I see, Sarah has done just that." The woman's smile faltered only for a moment. She leaned forward, lowering her voice but keeping her words sharp. "Are you defending her? Do you even know who I am? I could ruin this restaurant's reputation with a single review. Do you really want to side with a waitress over me?" The silence that followed was heavy. Every guest nearby was holding their breath, waiting to see how the manager would respond. Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding. She feared that he might give in, that he might apologize just to keep the peace. But Mr. Collins surprised everyone. He turned toward Sarah, not the woman, and asked gently, "Are you all right?" The words were simple, but their meaning was profound. In that moment, he had chosen dignity over arrogance, humanity over fear. The woman's eyes widened, her smirk fading as she realized the script was no longer hers to control. Sarah nodded slowly, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Yes, sir." The manager placed a hand behind his back, standing tall as he looked back at the woman. His calm authority carried a weight that silenced even her. For the first time since she had entered, she felt a flicker of uncertainty, and that flicker was only the beginning, because someone else, someone even more powerful, had been watching the entire scene unfold, and he was about to step in. The restaurant was no longer the same place it had been an hour ago. The warmth of laughter, The soft hum of conversations and the gentle rhythm of forks and glasses had all been swallowed by silence. Every pair of eyes seemed to flicker toward the center table where the rich woman sat, her arrogance shining like a crown she had placed on her own head. She leaned back in her chair, one arm draped casually over the backrest, her golden bracelet clinking softly as she moved. To her, the world was still under control. She believed she had cornered the manager, that her words carried more weight than anyone else's in the room. After all, wasn't she the one with wealth? With connections? With influence? Mr. Collins, the manager, stood calmly beside her table. His posture was firm but polite, his voice steady as he had defended Sarah without raising it. That simple act, asking the waitress if she was all right, had shifted something in the atmosphere. The diners who had sat in uneasy silence were now looking at him with respect, admiration even. But the woman only grew more impatient. "Enough with this nonsense," she said, her tone sharp like broken glass. "I came here to enjoy a fine dinner, not to argue with the staff. Now either you take my order properly or I'll make sure everyone in my circle knows this place treats its paying customers like dirt." Her voice rose louder than before, forcing more heads to turn. She thrived on this attention, but she didn't notice how different it was now. People weren't looking at her with admiration anymore. They were looking at her with quiet disgust. Mr. Collins gave a polite nod, still calm, and replied, "Of course, ma'am. We will take care of your order. But please remember, every guest here deserves respect, including our staff." The woman scoffed, waving her hand in the air dismissively. "Spare me the lecture. Respect is earned, not given. That girl should be grateful she even has a job." She pointed a manicured finger at Sarah, who stood a few steps away, her eyes lowered but her spine straight. At that moment, the quiet tension in the room thickened. The clinking of cutlery had stopped completely. Even the soft background music from the speakers seemed distant, drowned by the pounding of hearts waiting for what would come next. And then, footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and commanding. The sound of polished shoes against the wooden floor cut through the silence like a drumbeat announcing a new chapter. Heads turned toward the source. From the far side of the restaurant, a man in his early 60s approached. He wasn't dressed in flashy clothes, just a simple but elegant suit that spoke of old money and quiet confidence. His hair was silver, his face calm, his movements unhurried. Yet his presence was undeniable. Some of the diners recognized him immediately. Their eyes widened, whispers escaped lips, but no one dared say his name aloud. This was no ordinary man. This was the true owner of the restaurant. The one whose decisions built the place from the ground up. The one whose word meant more than any customer's money. The rich woman noticed him too, but she didn't recognize him. Not yet. She only saw an older man walking with authority, and she assumed, like always, that he was someone meant to serve her needs. She leaned back even further, smiling with arrogance. "Finally," she muttered loudly enough for those near her to hear. "Maybe now someone important will handle this properly." Mr. Collins stepped aside slightly, his expression respectful. Sarah froze in her spot, her hands tightening around her notepad. She knew exactly who was approaching, and her heart raced. The older man reached the table and stopped. His eyes first landed on Sarah, soft and kind, as though silently asking her if she was all right. Then his gaze shifted to the rich woman. But unlike the polite patience of Mr. Collins, his stare was different, quiet, steady, and heavy enough to make even the boldest person hesitate. The woman didn't hesitate, though. Not yet. She smiled, tapping her bracelet against the glass of water she had barely touched. "Ah, good. Are you in charge here? I was beginning to think this restaurant had no standards at all. Look at the staff you allow to represent you." She gestured toward Sarah once more, her voice dripping with cruelty. "If this is the best you can do, no wonder the service feels cheap." A hush fell deeper across the room. Every diner's eyes were locked on the man now. Sarah's chest rose and fell quickly, her breath shallow. She knew the truth was seconds away from being spoken, and the thought of it made her knees weak. The man's lips curved slightly, but it wasn't a smile. It was something else, something that carried weight, authority, and a promise that the performance was over. In that moment, the tables had begun to turn. The woman still believed she had the upper hand, still believed her money and pride could bend the restaurant to her will, but she had no idea who she was speaking to, and when she found out, the arrogance on her face would freeze into something very different. The older man stood tall at the center of the restaurant. His calm presence seemed to silence even the smallest sounds. The clatter of dishes, the shuffle of feet, the low hum of background music. It was as if the whole room paused, waiting for his next move. Sarah stood frozen a few steps behind the manager, her heart pounding. She knew this man well. She had seen him many times, not just as the restaurant owner, but as someone who treated his staff with respect, someone who never let pride rise above kindness. To the employees, he was more than a boss, he was a protector. The wealthy woman, however, didn't sense the weight of the moment. She crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair, wearing the same smug smile she had since she walked in. "So," she said with a sharp tone, "you must be the owner, yes?" "Finally." I was beginning to think this place had no standards at all. The man did not reply immediately. Instead, he looked at Sarah again, his expression soft, almost fatherly. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Sarah's lips trembled, but she nodded. "Yes, sir," she whispered. The woman scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake. Stop asking her. She's fine. She should be fine. She's just a waitress, honestly. Why waste time on her when a paying guest is clearly unhappy?" Her words carried across the room, and the diners who had been silent began exchanging glances of disbelief. The arrogance in her voice was unbearable, and yet she continued, not realizing the ground beneath her was about to vanish. Finally, the man turned to face her fully. His gaze was steady, his voice calm but firm. "You said something about standards." She nodded quickly, seizing the opportunity. "Yes, exactly, standards. Look around. Your staff clearly doesn't meet them. If you expect people like me to dine here, you must choose better. She jabbed her finger towards Sarah again, is completely unfit for a place like this. A restaurant with such prices should hire servers with polish, grace, class, not someone who looks like she should be cleaning the streets." The gasp from one of the nearby tables was audible. Sarah's hands clenched tightly against her notepad, her knuckles white. Her chest ached with the sting of the insult, but she said nothing. The man's eyes hardened ever so slightly. He leaned forward, placing one hand gently on Sarah's shoulder, steadying her, giving her silent strength. Then he looked back at the rich woman. "Ma'am," he began slowly, each word measured. "You are sitting in my restaurant. You are eating at my tables under my roof. And the young woman you have insulted over and over." He paused, letting the silence stretch across the room like a drawn bow. "She is not just a waitress here. She is my daughter." The words landed like thunder. Gasps spread across the restaurant. Forks dropped, glasses clinked against plates, and whispers filled the air. Sarah's eyes widened, her heart stopping in her chest. Though she had known he would defend her, she hadn't expected him to reveal the truth so openly. The woman's smirk vanished instantly. For the first time that evening, her face drained of its arrogant glow. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She blinked rapidly as if trying to process what she had just heard. Your daughter?" she stammered, her voice shaky. The man nodded. "Yes, my daughter. The one you mocked, belittled, and humiliated in front of an entire room. The one you thought was beneath you. She has more dignity, more kindness, and more worth in her little finger than all the jewels you wear on your hand." The restaurant erupted in quiet murmurs, heads nodding, faces filled with admiration for the man and pity for Sarah. The tension had finally broken, but not in the way the woman expected. Her confidence cracked. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her bracelet no longer a symbol of pride but of shame. I didn't know," she whispered, her eyes darting around at the people staring at her. The man's voice remained calm, but it carried the weight of finality. "That is the point. You didn't care to know. You judged her because of her shoes, her job, her appearance. You measured her worth with the wrong scale. And now you must face the truth. You have humiliated yourself, not her." The words struck deeper than any insult could. The rich woman's lips trembled, her eyes lowered for the first time that evening. The silence around her felt suffocating. Sarah stood still, her heart torn between relief and disbelief. She had never wanted to be revealed this way, but a strange pride swelled inside her. For so long she had endured whispers, judgments, and quiet humiliations. But now the world had seen her differently, not as someone weak, but as someone valued, and the woman who had mocked her. She was left speechless, her arrogance shattered by a truth she never expected. The restaurant no longer belonged to her performance. The stage had shifted and all eyes were now on Sarah, and on the man who had defended her. The truth was revealed. The balance had changed, and the night was far from over. The woman sat frozen in her chair. Just moments ago she had been the queen of the room, her voice loud, her arrogance shining like a crown. But now it was gone. Her lips parted, yet no words came out. Her eyes darted from the older man to Sarah, then to the dozens of faces watching her. It was as if the entire restaurant had turned into a silent courtroom, and she was the one standing trial. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the golden bracelet on her wrist, the very same piece she had used to show off her wealth. The sound of it clinking softly against the glass no longer gave her power. It betrayed her nerves. Her pride, her shield, had cracked wide open. Sarah stood still beside her father, her notepad still in her hands. She didn't speak, but her silence carried more weight than 1,000 words. For so long she had accepted insults quietly, believing it was part of her job, part of life. But now in front of everyone the truth had turned. The same woman who had tried to break her now sat broken herself, exposed in front of strangers who would remember this moment forever. The diner's eyes were all locked on the rich woman. Some looked at her with disgust, others with pity, but none with admiration. The performance she had staged for herself had collapsed, leaving only shame behind. The whispers grew, soft but cutting. "Did you hear? She insulted the owner's daughter." Imagine the arrogance. She thought she was above everyone. Each whisper seemed to stab at her pride, and though they weren't shouted, they rang louder in her ears than anything else. She shifted in her seat, her back no longer straight and proud, but hunched slightly as though trying to make herself smaller. Finally, she forced out a weak laugh, hoping to cover her embarrassment. "Oh, I didn't know. It was a misunderstanding. I was only joking, you see. No harm intended." Her voice shook, the false confidence dripping through every word. But the silence that followed was heavier than before. No one believed her. The owner's eyes remained steady, his voice calm but cold. "You weren't joking. You wanted to humiliate her. You wanted to feel powerful by tearing down someone you thought was beneath you. That is not a misunderstanding. That is who you chose to be tonight." The woman swallowed hard, her throat dry. She reached for her water glass, but her hand trembled so much that the liquid inside rippled. For the first time that evening, she looked small, her jewels and designer dress powerless against the truth that surrounded her. Sarah finally lifted her eyes and looked directly at the woman. Her gaze wasn't filled with anger. It was filled with quiet strength. She had endured every insult with dignity, and now she stood taller than the one who had tried to crush her. The rich woman's mouth opened again, as if to form another excuse, but nothing came out. The words stuck in her throat. Her usual weapons, sarcasm, arrogance, pride, had all failed her. She was truly frozen, trapped in the weight of her own actions. Around the room, guests began to nod, their faces filled with approval. Not for the woman, but for Sarah and her father. A soft clap began at one table, then another, until the sound of applause filled the room. It wasn't loud or mocking. It was a gesture of respect, a declaration that the values of kindness and dignity would always win over cruelty. The woman sat stiffly, her cheeks burning with shame as the applause grew. Every clap felt like a hammer striking her pride, reminding her that she was no longer admired, no longer feared. She had become the very thing she despised, an object of judgment. She lowered her eyes, unable to meet the gaze of anyone in the room. For once in her life, money couldn't save her, diamonds couldn't protect her, and her pride couldn't shield her. The owner placed a firm hand on Sarah's shoulder and spoke clearly so the entire restaurant could hear. "In this place, respect is not optional. It is the foundation, and anyone who cannot give it does not deserve to sit at our tables." The rich woman flinched at his words. She understood what they meant. She was no longer welcome. She looked down at her bracelet once more, the golden piece that had once made her feel untouchable, but now it was just metal, heavy on her wrist, a reminder of how hollow her pride had been. She slowly pushed back her chair, the sound scraping against the floor. For the first time that night, she did not walk with elegance or confidence. She walked with shame, her head lowered, her steps uneven, and as she left, the applause continued, not for her but for Sarah, the waitress she had tried to humiliate. It was in that frozen moment that the lesson became clear. Wealth can buy luxury, but it can never buy respect. The heavy wooden doors of the restaurant closed behind the woman with a dull thud. The sound lingered in the air like an ending note to a song no one wanted to hear again. Inside, the tension slowly began to fade. Guests shifted back in their seats. Waiters exhaled the breaths they didn't know they'd been holding, and the warm hum of the restaurant began to return. But the memory of what had just happened remained sharp, stamped into the night like ink that would never wash away. Sarah stood still, her notepad clutched to her chest. Her cheeks were warm, her heart pounding, but she wasn't trembling anymore. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. She wasn't invisible, she wasn't small, she was respected. The humiliation she had endured minutes ago had transformed into strength. Not because she had fought back with harsh words, but because she had chosen patience and dignity over pride. Her father, the owner, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. His eyes softened as he looked at her. "You did well," he said simply, and in those 3 words was all the comfort she needed. Across the restaurant, applause slowly faded into silence, replaced by nods of approval and small smiles directed at Sarah. Some diners even raised their glasses toward her, a silent toast to her strength. In that moment, she realized something important. Respect wasn't about money, jewels, or clothes. Respect came from how you treated others, no matter who they were. Meanwhile, outside on the dimly lit street, the wealthy woman stood frozen in the cool night air. The city lights sparkled on her jewelry, but for the first time they felt meaningless. She wrapped her arms around herself, though not from the cold, from the emptiness pressing against her chest. Her thoughts raced. She had walked in with confidence, believing she was above everyone else. She had insulted, mocked, and humiliated a girl who had done nothing but her job with kindness. And now she was the one humiliated. Her pride shattered, her image ruined before dozens of witnesses. She thought of the whispers, the stares, the applause that wasn't for her. No amount of wealth could erase what had happened. No amount of money could buy back the respect she had lost. For the first time in her life, she understood that she had been chasing the wrong treasure all along. Back inside, Sarah took a deep breath and finally set her notepad down on the counter. The other waiters gathered around her quietly, offering small words of encouragement, pats on the back, and proud smiles. They had all seen what she endured, and now they saw her rise above it. She wasn't just the waitress anymore. She was a symbol of strength. The restaurant slowly returned to its rhythm. Glasses clinked again. Laughter began to fill the room, and the smell of warm food reminded everyone why they had come. But still, the story of what happened lingered in the air. Guests whispered about it, not with discomfort anymore, but with respect. "That girl was so strong," someone said softly. "She didn't deserve any of that, but look how she stood tall. And her father? What a man. No wonder this place feels different." Sarah heard some of the whispers, but she didn't let them swell her pride. Instead, she smiled gently to herself, feeling a quiet peace settle over her. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need to humiliate the woman back. The lesson had been delivered without her saying a single cruel word. Her father looked at her once more before returning to his office. "Remember this, Sarah," he said in a low but firm voice. "People will always show who they are, not by how they treat those above them, but by how they treat those they think are beneath them. Tonight, everyone here saw the truth, and the truth always wins." Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with pride. Outside, the woman walked slowly down the street, her heels clicking against the pavement, but her steps were no longer confident. Each click echoed hollow in the night, a reminder of her fall. She clutched her bracelet, once a symbol of her superiority, now nothing but a chain pulling her down with guilt. For the rest of her life, she would remember that evening, not as a night of luxury, but as the night she was taught a painful truth. Money can buy you a table at a restaurant, but it can never buy you class, kindness, or respect. And inside, Sarah carried a lesson too. She had been reminded that patience was power, humility was strength, and kindness, no matter how small, was never wasted. As the lights of the restaurant glowed warmly against the night sky, the story of that evening became more than just a private moment. It became a tale whispered by guests, shared with friends, and remembered by all who witnessed it. A tale of pride, downfall, and the unshakable value of respect.